You spend 20 years being called the professor. Everyone expects you to be cold, calculated, and above the petty drama of the paddock. Alain Prost built his legendary career on logic, precision, and a surgical approach to racing that earned him 4 world titles and the respect of the entire world. But behind that calm French demeanor and the strategic mind, there were drivers he simply could not tolerate. Men who disrespected the safety codes he valued, who played dirty games behind the scenes, and who turned the sport into a personal war he never wanted to fight. At 71 years old, the silence finally ends. 5 drivers. 5 deep-seated grudges the fans never truly understood. Before we reveal the 5 men Alain Prost truly hated, we need to understand why the professor's judgment carries such extraordinary weight. Because from a man who mastered the mind game, a private grudge meant everything. To understand why Alain Prost's grudges carry such weight, you have to understand the man they called the professor. Born on February 24, 1955, in Saint-Chamond, France, Prost didn't enter Formula One with the loud bravado of a superstar. He entered with a mind that worked faster than his car. While others drove with their hearts and their heels, Prost drove with a stopwatch and a strategy. He was a man of precision in a sport that was often chaotic and deadly. His career statistics are the stuff of legend: 4 world championships, 51 Grand Prix victories, and a record for the most wins that stood for over a decade. But numbers alone don't tell the story of his weight in the paddock. When Prost arrived in the early 1980s, he didn't rely on raw, reckless aggression. He was the master of the long game. He knew exactly how much fuel he had, how much rubber was left on his tires, and exactly when his rivals would eventually crack under the pressure of his consistency. Prost was a man who believed in a code of conduct, a professional dignity that he felt was essential for a sport where death was always just one mistake away. He wasn't just fast. He was the standard bearer for intellectual racing. When a man with 4 titles and a reputation for calculating every move names an enemy, it isn't out of pettiness or a temporary temper tantrum. It is a deliberate, measured judgment. For 16 years, Prost sat in the cockpit of the most powerful machines on Earth, outlasting champions and outthinking geniuses. He was the quiet Frenchman who let his results do the talking. So, when he reveals that there were men he genuinely could not stand, it's not just track talk. It is the final verdict from a man who spent 30 years being the most respected mind in the garage, proving that even a professor has a breaking point. Driver number 5, Niki Lauda. For the 5th driver on this list, we look at a relationship that defines the phrase professional resentment. While the history books often paint them as a teacher and a student, the reality for Alain Prost was a deep-seated frustration that simmered beneath the surface. Driver number 5 is the legendary 3-time champion, Niki Lauda. The hate here wasn't born from dirty driving or personal insults. It was born from the cold, hard realization that you can be the fastest man on the planet and still lose to a man who is simply more cunning. The defining moment of this grudge was the 1984 season at McLaren. Prost was in his prime, a whirlwind of speed who won 7 races that year. Lauda, the veteran returning from retirement, won only 5. Yet, when the dust settled at the final race, Lauda had secured the world championship by a mere 0.5 points. Prost was devastated. For a man who valued logic, losing a title while being the superior performer felt like a glitch in the universe. He resented the fact that Lauda didn't try to outrun him on the track. Instead, Lauda used his massive influence and psychological mastery to manipulate the team and the car setup. To the professor, Lauda represented a style of racing that was more about gamesmanship than pure speed. He hated the narrative that he was just learning from Niki. In Prost's mind, he was already the master, and being outmaneuvered by a man who was technically slower was a bitter pill that took years to swallow. It was a grudge built on the ultimate professional insult: being outcalculated by the only man who was smarter than the professor himself. Driver number 4, Nigel Mansell. For the 4th driver on this list, we move to a rivalry that was less about on-track speed and more about the toxic, high-stakes politics of the Ferrari garage. Driver number 4 is the tough, no-nonsense Brit, Nigel Mansell. To Alain Prost, Mansell was not just a teammate. He was a professional nightmare that tested the professor's patience to its absolute limit. The hatred reached a boiling point during the 1990 season when they were teammates at Ferrari. While the fans saw two legends in red cars, the garage was a war zone. The defining moment occurred at the British Grand Prix. Mansell was the local hero, but Prost was the reigning world champion who knew how to play the political game better than anyone. Sensing that Mansell had a superior chassis during practice, Prost used his influence to secretly swap their cars before the race without Mansell's knowledge. When Mansell discovered the betrayal, he was so brokenhearted and enraged that he announced his retirement from the sport on the spot. Prost genuinely despised Mansell's public persona. He viewed the Brit as a theatrical driver who always had an excuse or a dramatic complaint whenever things went wrong. To Prost, Mansell was a drama queen who exaggerated injuries and collapsed after races for attention. In return, Mansell viewed Prost as a backstabber who used team bosses to handicap his rivals. For a man who valued quiet professionalism, Mansell's loud, emotional, and unpredictable nature was an insult to the discipline of racing. Driver number 3, Riccardo Patrese. For the third driver on this list, we move away from teammates and look at a man Alain Prost considered to be one of the most reckless and brainless drivers to ever sit in a cockpit. Driver number 3 is the Italian veteran, Riccardo Patrese. While Prost's friction with others was often political, his animosity toward Patrese was rooted in a deep-seated fear for his own safety. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Patrese had earned a reputation in the paddock for being erratic and wild. For a calculating driver like the Professor, this was the ultimate sin. The seeds of this hatred were sown early, specifically during the horrific crash at the 1978 Italian Grand Prix that claimed the life of the legendary Ronnie Peterson. Although Patrese was later cleared of legal wrongdoing, many drivers at the time, including Prost, blamed Patrese's aggressive maneuvering for triggering the multi-car pileup. Prost saw Patrese as a rolling time bomb who didn't understand the consequences of his actions. To Prost, racing was a game of chess. To Patrese, it often looked like a demolition derby. Throughout the 80s, Prost famously complained that Patrese would weave on the straights in ways that were not just competitive, but suicidal. At the 1982 Monaco Grand Prix, under chaotic rain, the two were fighting for the lead when Patrese's unpredictability again caused tension. Prost hated the fact that Patrese stayed in the sport for so long, viewing him as a symbol of the old dangerous F1 that he was trying to modernize. For Prost, Patrese wasn't a rival to be respected. He was an obstacle to be avoided at all costs, representing a lack of discipline that the Professor simply could not tolerate. Driver number 2, René Arnoux. For the second driver on this list, we move to a rivalry that was perhaps even more bitter because it involved two men from the same nation. Driver number 2 is the fiery Frenchman, René Arnoux. While the world was focused on Prost's battles with international stars, the war he fought at home in France against Arnoux was personal, political, and deeply resentful. The hate between Prost and Arnoux reached a point of no return during their time as teammates at Renault. In 1982, Renault was the powerhouse of F1, but the team was struggling with internal ego. At the French Grand Prix in Le Castellet, a clear gentleman's agreement had been made before the race. If the Renaults were leading, Arnoux was supposed to let Prost win to help him secure the World Championship points. Instead, Arnoux completely ignored the team orders. He raced as if his life depended on it, leaving Prost in the dust to take the victory. For Prost, this wasn't just a lost race, it was a stabbing in the back by a fellow countryman. He felt that Arnoux had traded a potential world title for Renault just for a single moment of personal glory. Prost, the Professor, was all about the big picture, strategy, and long-term success. He viewed Arnoux as a wild card who lacked the intellectual discipline required to lead a top-tier team. The tension in the Renault garage became so toxic that the mechanics and engineers had to take sides. Prost hated being portrayed as the political villain, while Arnoux played the brave racer who refused to bow to orders. To Prost, Arnoux represented a lack of professionalism that he simply could not tolerate, proving that sometimes your teammate is your greatest enemy. Driver number 1, Ayrton Senna. There was only one driver who truly got under Alain Prost's skin more than any other. Ayrton Senna, the most feared and legendary presence in the history of Formula One, was the single driver who made the professor's quiet patience snap in ways nothing else ever could. While history remembers them as the greatest rivals to ever grace a cockpit, the reality behind the scenes was a deep-seated animosity that went far beyond mere sporting competition. Their rivalry reached its defining moment at Suzuka in 1989 and 1990. Prost felt that Senna was a madman on the track who believed God was his co-pilot, making him feel that Senna was willing to die and take Prost with him just to prove a point on a single corner. When Senna deliberately rammed Prost at over 160 miles per hour during the 1990 race, the Frenchman was disgusted. For a man who valued restraint and dignity, that moment revealed everything. Senna had pushed the most patient driver in the sport completely past his limit. Off the track, Senna's psychological tactics extended beyond racing. He used the media to paint Prost as a political manipulator while portraying himself as the pure racer. For Prost, who believed every driver deserved basic respect regardless of championship count, Senna's win-at-all-costs attitude was genuinely offensive. Senna won more races and captured the world's imagination, but for years, he never won Prost's respect. And for a man whose opinion was the gold standard of the paddock, that missing respect told the entire story. Alain Prost spent 16 years being the world's favorite professor and nobody's enemy, or so the world believed. But as we've seen, Niki Lauda, Nigel Mansell, Riccardo Patrese, René Arnoux, and Ayrton Senna tested the patience of the most calculated driver the sport ever produced. At 71 years old, the professor finally tells the truth. Drop a comment below and let us know which of these rivalries was the most iconic in your eyes. If you enjoyed this deep dive into racing history, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more untold racing stories. Until next time, keep your eyes on the track. Thanks for watching.